On this episode of the Houndsman XP podcast, I've got Mr. John Bolin coming back in the house for you to listen to. Last time he was on here was episode 125, Shaking Hands with the HSUS. It was one of our biggest episodes we've ever produced, and John shared all of the things that the animal rights extremists are using against us and how they are strategizing to take away our freedoms. Well, we are going to shift gears in this podcast. John and I are still going to talk about how we can live simple and live free. We are facing unprecedented times in my lifetime for sure of fuel prices, food shortages, economic downturns, all of the things that affect us as houndsmen. If you can't put gas in your truck to go hunting, then you got to come up with some other options. If you cannot afford the grocery bill, cutbacks have to be made somewhere, either in hounds, feeding your hounds, caring for your hounds, whatever that is. We've got to find a way to survive this tsunami of economic challenges that we have facing us right now. There is no doubt about it that houndsmen are survivors. We are self-sufficient, self-sustaining. We make our own gear when we can't afford it. We find our own ways to take care of our hounds and do a lot of home veterinary and stuff. And this is right in that same vein. I want to set the stage for this podcast by reading from the Bible. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. Folks, there really is a season for everything. And one thing that I have found in my lifetime and throughout my hunting career is when I keep those seasons in perspective and take care of the things that need to be taken care of when they need to be taken care of, then I enjoy my time in the woods a lot more. Right now is the height of garden season, and I grow a garden so that I can afford to do other things in my life. It's also nice to take to camp. When you're taking those canned goods and food that you're preparing now to camp with you, that is so rewarding. There has never been a better time for you to start thinking about how to be more sustaining, self-sustaining. There's never been a better time to start expanding your knowledge of how to live simple and how to live free. The Old South Dog Box is rocking. Let's get the tailgate down. It's time to dump the box. All right, we are in Martinsville, Indiana, on the outskirts at an undisclosed compound. John Bolin.
Thanks a lot for putting me on the target now, on the list now.
Yeah,
compound.
You got back on the list last fall when you did that first podcast with me.
Yeah.
And we've been waiting and trying and thinking about what we were going to do for round two. But what episode was that? You remember?
I don't.
I should know that. That's kind of my job to know that sort of stuff. Episode 125 is the first one we aired. And just to give a real brief backstory, we talked about your work in law enforcement and then going to work for ASPCA and things like that. And when I first met you, then and came here, and I thought, man, we got to do a follow-up podcast about some other stuff, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about something that's a little bit different than what we normally do on the Houndsman XP podcast, but we're going to talk about self-sustained living and the importance of knowing how to do that. It goes right along with what we talked about in the first podcast about being self-reliant and not dependent on the government to supply things for us. And that's what we as houndsmen really want. We don't need the government to come in, and we just need them to leave us alone.
Right.
And we'll go out in the garden here in a little bit and look around, and I want to kind of draw some word pictures for our audience and stuff. But give us an idea, how much property first off, John, I'm getting way ahead of myself. I'm so wound up to record this podcast. What have you been up to all winter? That's what we ought to talk about first.
Well, winter's a slow time for me. I kind of, fortunately, I'm self-employed, at least for the time being. And I have been for about 5 years now. I've been self-employed. So I'm in the construction business and exterior construction work. So in the winter, if I'm fortunate enough to be able to put a little back where I can kind of chill through the winter, no pun intended.
Yeah, not too chilly though.
Yeah, that's what I do. So and winter, it gives me an opportunity to go out. I've been really fortunate to have met some people that have invited me to do some speaking engagements throughout the country. And fall and winter is a good time for me to do that. I travel and do speaking engagements.
Yeah, because since we talked, I think you went to Holmesville was that with Protect the Harvest?
Yeah, Holmes County.
Holmes County, Ohio.
Yeah, that was the Protect the Harvest fundraiser that they had out there. And I was fortunate enough to be able to speak there at that event. And I go to a lot of the like dog breeder association meetings and speak there. Is that my dog barking in the background there?
I'm not sure if it's yours or if it's mine. I brought the Tough with me, so
it just, for some reason, I just barely heard that. But I think your listeners are probably used to hearing barking dogs.
Yes, and it's totally acceptable in this podcast.
We'll just let him bark then.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what in the winter I don't do a lot. Keep the wood stove fired up.
There you go.
And,
what sort of things, when you go to the Protect the Harvest fundraiser and you speak, what sort of topics are you talking about?
What they generally are interested in hearing from me is my experience working for the ASPCA, my experience with the animal rights groups, and becoming a whistleblower, basically, against the lies and the misinformation that the animal rights groups put forth. And that's what I like to speak about and try to educate folks about. And really that has kind of evolved over the years into the bigger picture of what these organizations represent, and the bigger picture, the bigger threat that groups like them pose for the country as a whole, and for our individualism and our self-sufficient. This country was founded by self-sufficient people that didn't need any kind of intervention, didn't need handouts. They stepped up and they did what they had to do to survive. And whether that was hunting, fishing, farming, bartering with their neighbors, family units were close.
Yeah. No, he's fine. You can let him bark.
Okay. If it's not distracting.
Unless he needs to come in. You did say he's a house dog.
Yeah, unfortunately. Let me go see if I can get him back in here so he does. His barking is distracting me probably more than it is you.
All right, go ahead.
Let me see.
I'll just fill this in. Everybody needs to go, and everybody just should, if you haven't heard episode 125, he gives the whole backstory on John, his history with law enforcement, how he went to work, ended up going to work for the ASPCA, the horrors that he saw in that organization, which caused him to quit, and then get hooked up with Protect the Harvest and Trent Loose and start doing speaking tours across the country. So you'd be doing yourself a big favor not to dive any deeper into this podcast and go check out episode 125 and hear John's backstory on that. But John, you and I share that same background, and we've worked in a lot of those same areas. And it's strange that you get two former government employees that are skeptical of the government. you know,
right.
I love my country, but I don't trust my government.
Yeah,
But we're not going to bash government. This isn't a political podcast. We're going to talk about the things places that things we can do, and the things that truly make us free. And you're doing it right here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's I hope that I am. You know, we can talk about it. We can complain about everything. We can fall into the fear and the paranoia and the panic of the current situation with inflation and shortages. I mean, this stuff's all real. It's very real. All you have to do is go in the grocery stores and you talk to these people that are actually in. You know, it was interesting. It's interesting because.
Let me add something there real quick.
Sure.
We can all get on Facebook and complain about it. That's easy. Yep. That's easy to do. But you're actually doing something here to try to make a difference, not for the world, but for you and your family.
That's where it starts. Right?
And you said you've got a co-op going on here with about 3 different families, and we'll talk about that in a second and see how that's working out. But just getting on Facebook and griping about stuff and then going and buying your groceries at Walmart isn't solving the problem.
Absolutely.
And all of this stuff, the reason I wanted to do this on the Houndsman XP podcast is because when we look back at history, when our country started, that's where all the roots for our hound hunting, that's where our hunting culture comes from. That's where our hounds come from. It was a lifestyle for those people to be able to survive in that environment and on the landscape. And I want to talk about how we can continue to do that in the 21st century.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So
I'm excited then because I love that topic.
Yeah.
I love that topic, and I'll say in the outset, I don't claim to be any kind of an expert. I don't claim to have, I don't have a YouTube channel where I get on there, and I'm not bashing the YouTube guys, but there's a lot of, everybody feels like they got to have some kind of public notoriety, some kind of social media notoriety, some kind of presence that they can get patted on the back. Well, my pat on the back is the way I feel when I'm eating pork and beef and chicken and eggs and produce that came off of my property. And I'm watching my family sit around this big table and eating those things. And knowing that I could literally, what I have now, what we have, this co-op, what we have as far as livestock and produce that's in the ground growing and producing now, we could literally, now, we'd have to give up some of the things, the treats that you get when you go out.
I didn't see any Snicker bars growing up there.
Yeah, there's no ice cream machines out there. There is kind of an ice cream machine across the road, though, Jersey Milk Cow.
Yeah.
But
you ever made it out of goat's milk?
Huh? No.
That is the best.
I'm open to try it.
Have you got a milk goat out there?
We have a little goat that she could be milked. Yeah. She's pregnant right now. I think she could be milked. You know more about goats than I do. You could probably tell me later on if we look at her. But it's all about the udder and the teats, right?
That's right.
You milk a cow, a camel, a goat, a sheep.
Seth Hall wants to milk jackrabbits. Said they're the densest. He claims it, and he's a biologist. He's a wildlife biologist.
Okay.
He's a jackrabbit rodent nut. And he claims that the highest calorie, nutrient dense milk comes from the jackrabbit.
Well, that's
what
interesting. Well, hey, if they can milk an almond, they can milk a rabbit.
Don't encourage it.
That's great. I know that rabbits are a great source of quick meat.
Yeah.
We have the rabbits are across the road at the neighbors, and he has the big white, like California whites, the big meat producing rabbits, and they're raised with the chickens and stuff are right underneath them. So they're dropping everything they drop and waste. The chickens pick up, and that rabbit manure is the best fertilizer.
Absolutely.
The best.
Absolutely. We'll get into the techniques in a minute.
Yeah.
What got you to this point?
You know, I was raised this way. I was raised out of necessity because we were two families and even a piece of another family, all together in one house, the house right up the road from here. And my dad he worked, and my mom stayed at home. Mm-hmm. She really didn't have a choice. There were so many of us hooligans at home. There was no way she could. I mean, we would have torn the house to the ground if she tried to work outside the home. So she had a much harder job, which was staying home and raising a bunch of kids and dealing with everything there. But my dad was a mailman, and he wasn't making a fortune. And he was raised, born in 1935, and was raised up, you know, right after all the Depression and everything. And it was just something that we were just raised that way. We didn't know really that there was anything different. Mm-hmm. We just, to have a big garden, and our garden was on some of the old ground that used to be in the family, not very far from here. We could walk there and we did several times, pushing wheelbarrows and stuff down the road.
Right.
The garden was what my dad would refer to as a truck patch, big garden, and a lot of times half to 1 full acre of garden. I mean, you couldn't see, standing at one end of the row of tomatoes, you couldn't see the other end unless, you know, you had to walk to it.
Yeah.
And we would not me, but my mom and my aunt and my grandma and everybody in the fall would get together. We would go harvest everything, and all the ladies in the family would process all of that. And we had a basement under the house. It was just an unfinished concrete block wall basement. And the length of that basement had shelves, and they were full of canned produce. And that's just the way we were raised. And I'm so thankful. I've said that over the course of the past few years with all this stuff that's been going on, all the uncertainty and the fear. I am so thankful that I was raised that way.
Yeah.
I was milking cows before I went to school, in grade school. I mean, I was milking cows when I was 5, 6 years old.
Right.
Hand milking. We always had at least one, sometimes 2 milk cows.
Yeah.
And got on the school bus and went to school a lot of times with cow manure on my boots and have to stomp it off before I went in class or get in trouble. And, you know, we were raised that way. And to me, it just makes sense.
You know, I've said this before. People, I'm the oldest of 6. We had a small farm. We raised pork. We raised a couple pigs. It wasn't an operation.
Right.
It was a couple pigs that when you got 6 kids in your family, you got plenty of slop to feed hogs.
Yeah.
Not that we were wasteful, but you just did that. And we had beef, and we had chickens, and we had a big garden, and we did the same thing. You know, I remember sitting under the shade tree and snapping beans, and Mom would take them in, and next thing you know, the counter's full of processed green beans.
Right.
And one of the things that Dad did to us that I probably held it against him my whole life, and he would let some beans go to seed so that we could we're gonna have shell out beans. You know, we're gonna have dried beans. And I remember the hours and hours and hours we spent shelling beans to get a bowl full of beans.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
And I'm walking through the store, and there was a bag of dried beans on the shelf for 35 cents. And I was just like, what the hell are we doing? That was the light bulb moment for me. I was like, what are we doing? It became obvious to me the only reason I was shelling beans was because if I wasn't, I was going to be tearing something up.
Yeah.
And Dad had to keep us busy all day long while he was working.
Yeah. I'm sure that's part of it, but you know,
we had milk cows too.
Yeah.
Yep.
It did keep us out of trouble. Am I echoing there a little bit? It sounded like the sound changed a little bit on me. I moved my mic to take a drink.
Yeah, you're good.
I don't know about all this technology. We could just sit on the bench in front of the feed store and whittle a stick and talk.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, we were busy too. We didn't have a lot of downtime to get into trouble, and we got into our share of trouble for sure. But we were a lot busier living out in the country and living that way, and we always had something we could go do. I mean, these hills and hollers, you know, all the creeks flowing through them, and all the little fishing ponds everywhere. You get.
I am going to help you with that mic placement. Yep. There you go.
All right.
That'll help us a bunch.
Good.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean that's a different time in life, and I wouldn't let my kids. I mean, I'm not gonna jump to that conclusion and say that, because I did let my kids run the neighborhood with their friends and stuff, but we live in a different time, and it's, as you know from our background and profession, ignorance is bliss sometimes, and doing what we did for a living, you see the evil side of the world, and it's tough. It's tough to let your kids run and go, knowing what kind of evil is out there that they could possibly encounter these days. And but you know, I've been guilty over the past couple years of jumping on this bandwagon and that bandwagon and going down a big negativity rabbit hole, and I'm going to get away from that, because we can be realistic and understand that we do have some serious problems. All facets of life, we have some serious issues that need to be taken care of in this country, but there's still a lot of good. There's still a lot of good people. People need to get to know their neighbors again. You know, there's neighbors that don't have a clue what their neighbor looks like, what they do for a living. Not that that's any of our business, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, back during the COVID, when COVID first kicked off, remember how everybody was pretty much quarantined in our houses, or, you know, a lot of people were buying into that. And what I saw, and I even mentioned it maybe on the podcast, what I saw during that time period, especially in town, you know, families were sitting on the front porch, and they were talking to the family on the front porch next to them.
Right.
When's the last time that happened?
I know.
And we started seeing that sort of stuff, and people started to wake up at that point, I think. And now we're looking at a situation where we're hearing about the food shortages and the fuel and everything else. And if people don't know how to do some of the stuff that you're doing here, or co-op with people that do, then there's going to be some real problems.
Yeah, there is.
And yeah, not to be negative, because what we discussed before, we're not going to dwell on the problems. We're going to focus on solutions.
Absolutely.
And when we can show that you can grow food and you can preserve food and you can do this stuff, that gives you another sense of freedom. You don't have to be dependent on people. And
Absolutely.
and people, the government does not like that.
No, they don't. They don't. Certain branches of government, for sure, want us to be completely dependent on them. They want to control everything we do.
That's what got Britain in trouble about 245 years ago. We figured out that we didn't need them.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's right. We got tired of it.
Yeah.
We got tired of it, and guys came up out of the hills and hollers and said, let's go.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't advocate any kind of violence to trying to correct things. There's another way that we can have a revolution in this country, and that is by becoming self-sufficient again.
Yeah.
By getting back to the small neighborhoods, the small communities. Just stop participating in this system. Stop participating in the rat race. Start bartering with your neighbors. Don't exchange cash. Exchange goods for goods. The IRS doesn't want to hear that. IRS doesn't want anything to do with that. In fact, the IRS will ask you sometimes if you're audited. They'll ask you. I heard this from a friend that was self-employed. I'll probably get audited now. He said they ask him if he ever bartered. for his services. He was in the logging business.
Oh yeah.
And he said, no, I'm always just lost.
Yeah.
He said, I always just lose.
Right.
There's no.
So what was the tipping point how long have you been doing this? I call it backyard gardening.
Mm-hmm.
There's even a book out there called Backyard Gardening.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And, read it, but so I don't call it that. It's a name I picked up.
Mm-hmm.
But how long have you been in homesteading? Such a cliche term because we're not homesteading this. This place has been developed for 175 years.
Right. Homesteading is the new fad phrase. And I even call, I have a Facebook page for our little co-op and call it a homestead, but
which I'm on.
Yeah. That's right.
Participate in that.
Yep. And so I mean, I'm guilty of that too. It's a catchy word.
Sure.
But
it's descriptive.
Yeah. But to answer your question, we have lived here on this little piece of property for 20 years now, and it started then. I've always had a garden.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I was raised with growing gardens and animals for food, and had my own garden when I was 15, 16 years old. I'd plant my own little separate gardens, and so ever since then, I mean, all my life, I don't think I've gone one season without having a garden of some kind. And on this particular piece of property, it's been a continual evolution. And I'm going to use this opportunity to give some advice that I feel is very valuable advice to anyone that wants to become more self-sufficient. I'm not going to say completely self-sufficient, although we could. Anybody can become completely self-sufficient, but start small.
Mm-hmm.
Don't look at some of these other places and if you looked at my place, and I've got a good aerial view photo of this place just from a few months ago. My son-in-law brought home a big bucket truck from work and to change a light bulb out of a security light. And anyway, he sent me up in it as high as it would go, and I took pictures, and I thought, wow. I mean, it just looks totally different from that point of view. You can really see how every square foot of this place is being utilized for something edible.
Right.
And
on 1 acre.
Yeah, 1 acre, and not even one full acre that is being used.
Because you do have grass out here. You've got a lawn.
There's little patches of grass out here that have to be mowed and stuff. It's not all edible yet. And there's, you go down over the hill. Yeah, yet. You go down over the hill, and there's still some wooded area here that goes down to a little creek that's part of my 1 acre that hasn't really been tapped into for anything.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer that question, it's been a work in progress, an evolution of adding this and that and seeing what works. I've built little things, little animal enclosures or garden areas, garden spots. I've planted certain trees and things, and I've dug them up, moved them. I've tore down little buildings that I've built over the course of 20 years and decided that wasn't the right spot. When you have this small space, you really got to do what's best to utilize the space. You have all the considerations, especially with this being on a hillside, basically. Water runoff. The other day we had a really hard downpour for about 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked out the window and I could see where all the water was naturally going. And I took pictures of it because that's an opportunity to see where you need to put in swells or you need to divert the water from one point to the other to cause less erosion and to be able to capture that water.
Mm-hmm.
I've got all these little buildings I have out here. Eventually my goal is to have a way to catch that water off of every building and use that water to water animals and to water gardens and whatever else. So, start small, even if it's, everybody knows how rewarding it is to grow a tomato plant and to harvest those tomatoes. There's jokes going on Facebook about, I'll have in a few weeks, I'll be able to harvest a 25-cent tomato that cost me $25 to get to this point. It's not about it. When you start small scale, it's not about that necessarily. It's not about you're not going to save a ton of money.
Right.
Everybody knows you can go to the grocery store and buy this crap they call produce and this garbage they call food. You can buy it for little or nothing. But unless you're going to local farmers markets, and even a lot of those local farmer markets, I'll get diverted. You'll have to reel me in here. But some of these local farmer markets are, in my opinion, they're just a joke.
Well, they're buying their produce from excess sales that end up at these produce auctions.
Yep.
They haul it into their store and they're selling it to you, and it's the same thing that you're buying at Kroger.
They're peeling the little stickers off of it and putting it in on their
A lot of
table.
times it is. Unless you can go unless you can go to the market and see the tomato growing or the corn growing or the beans growing, then we've got a vegetable wholesale market auction house right down there where I live, and people will go to the city to the warehouse and grab the excess and bring it down there and sell it. It was grown in the same place that the Kroger tomato, and I'm no expert on this at all, but I have listened to some different things about the nutritional quality of the vegetables that we are buying in our supermarkets is not even in the same spectrum of what you can grow on your own property. We are robbing ourselves of nutrients and vitamins and everything by eating this stuff.
Absolutely. I'm just like you. I'm no expert on this whatsoever. And I said earlier, I think the proof is in the pudding. I don't have to be an expert. All I know is how damn good that tomato tastes.
That's right.
It's because it's coming. It's on the ground, and a lot of it is a placebo thing, too. It's just the joy of knowing you grew that. But there is I believe there's a lot to be said about that tomato that's pulling those nutrients out of the ground all the way to the stage where it's ready to be eaten. We're not growing hybrid tomatoes that we're picking green because we know they're going to ripen on the way from California or wherever, Mexico to here.
And if they don't, we gas them when we turn them red.
Yeah. Your body knows when you eat something that you grew that's full of those nutrients and full of those vitamins. That's why it tastes so good, because your body's saying, I'm starving for this.
Yeah.
Your body's screaming for those nutrients and that health that comes from growing your own food. And I'm not an organic gardener. I've tried, but
you've got a lot of organic stuff going on.
I do. There's a lot of organic. I don't use a lot of chemicals and fertilizers and stuff. I use natural fertilizer. There's plenty of that around here with all the animals we have. But I'm not going to try to profess to be some kind of organic gardener either. You have to do what works best for you.
I like a little Roundup. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I mean,
it saves on weed eating time.
Yeah. We were talking about marigolds. And they're proven. They're proven you plant those in between rows of stuff, and they'll keep some insects away, and they'll attract beneficial insects. I have like native wildflowers planted in patches all over this acre to draw pollinators and beneficial insects. But it's all about I like the libertarian approach to most things in life, and that's just let a guy grow the stuff the way he wants to grow it.
Yeah.
The main thing is just start doing it. Start doing it. Till you up a spot in your yard, and to hell with HOAs and rules and regulations about how pretty your grass is supposed to be. Grow something edible. I was listening to something recently, and I can't remember the name of the podcast or the YouTube channel it was on, but it was a former military couple, and they're doing permaculture, and which permaculture is another thing I've delved into a little bit, and I'm trying to practice that here. And
I'm not even familiar with it.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to profess to be an expert, but permaculture is planting your trees and your berries and your perennial vegetables and different things and annuals in a way that mimics nature. You take advantage of the natural flow of the water through your land, and there's trees with a certain kind of berry or herb that grows well next to it under the shade of it, and you get that going, and the idea of, I could be wrong here, but what I've gathered from what I've read about it and studied about it is the idea is that once you get that food forest going, that permaculture setup, that you can walk away from it and it'll take care of itself. It'll take care of itself, just like in nature.
Yeah.
When you see plants that are growing well together and producing without any kind of human intervention whatsoever.
Right.
You can do that on your own property. So I'm delving into that a little bit here and trying to go in that direction. So when my time as being the caretaker of this little tiny piece of dirt is gone, that somebody can walk through and will be like, wow, this is cool.
Yeah.
And they can pick an apple and they can pick a peach and they can, that's what it's all about.
Well, okay, so somebody listen to this podcast, and I'm telling you that I want to tell people and make sure that they understand why this is important to me. So this fall, when I go to bear camp, I'm going to have vegetable soup that's already canned, and it's going to go to bear camp with me, and that's going to be a meal. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have processed meat that, either sausages or something that go to bear camp or on a hunting trip with me. So this is all stuff that we can utilize now to prepare us and help us enjoy our times in the field even more and have that understanding. So if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, okay, well, I've always thought about doing this, give us some ideas of where people can find information and how you got your start and some of the things you lean on to learn some of the things you've learned, John.
Okay. And, right now, of course, there's so much available online. But I'm from the generation, I'm telling my age, that was pre-internet, where you actually had to pick up a book and read it.
Mm-hmm.
Or you had to ask an elder for advice. You had to go hang out in the garden with somebody or watch a hog being butchered or whatever. Yeah. And that's really the best way. But there are some great resources out here that you can still get in hard copy book. And I feel like that it's important to do that. Get as many magazines that you can and hard copy books, because when the grid does go down, when we're restricted access to, this is going to sound like conspiracy theory stuff.
We've got tinfoil hats right over here.
Yeah, go ahead and get those tinfoil hats, because now we're probably being listened to. In fact, I hear radio transmissions coming through my filling. But we've
just become too dependent on it.
Yeah, we've become too dependent on it. I've got a good friend, Trent Luce, and I'll be seeing him at Mount Rushmore on Independence Day. He will not use a GPS. It drives me nuts. He will not. He'll drive from one side of the country to the other, and I've been in the passenger seat with him, and I'm like, Trent, I'm turning on the GPS. He said, no, you're not. You turn on that GPS, I'm going to throw your phone out the window. He said, we got to know how to get from one place to another without that.
GPS has turned me into a dumbass.
Oh, man.
I used to be able to navigate anywhere because we had to.
Mm-hmm.
And now, just coming here today, I used to, if I'd have been here one time, I'd have known how to get back here.
Yeah.
And even today, I was like, okay, just hit the address and let it take me.
Right. You said it, though. GPS and the internet has turned us into dumbasses. We don't have to retain anything anymore.
Yeah.
We don't retain anything to memory. We don't need to.
How many phone numbers did you know when you were a kid?
Several. I mean, you had to have them memorized. I knew my grandma's phone number, 765-342-6654.
Yep. My home number was 812-579-5151.
Yeah.
My best friend's number, I can recite it. My dad's work number, I knew it.
Yep.
I don't even remember my wife's cell phone number right now because it's in my phone and I can hit it.
Yep. So getting back to your original question, before I say that, this will be hilarious too because of my point, it's nice to know somebody that can derail just as easily as I can. And we can talk.
Hey, we're going to talk about these books.
We could start on one thing and end up way over here somewhere else. And the listeners are like, man, these guys just ramble. Come on, get to the point. This is boring the hell out of us. The books, okay, I've got two laying right here in front of me. The Encyclopedia of Country Living by Carla Emery. This is the updated 9th edition, and it's probably up to the 10th, 11th, 12th edition by now. I don't know how old this one is, but this book, literally from front to back, would be all you need. It's the Bible of country living. Mm-hmm. Everything you need to know about growing food, processing animals, building animal enclosures, preserving food. Everything is in here. And
does it talk about like canning?
Everything.
And
all
so
of that.
Pressures that you need to set your pressure canner at.
All of it.
It's in that one book.
It's in it. And down here at the bottom it says over 600,000 copies sold. These people need to pay me for what I just said. I think they need to send me some money.
Yeah.
I mean, we should be able to profit off of promoting this.
Yeah.
And the other one that you and I both love, and we both have the full set of them, is the Foxfire books. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Foxfire book's going way back earlier than this Encyclopedia of Country Living. And this one right here says hog dressing, log cabin building. Oh, and for the modern era people, hog dressing doesn't mean we're putting pink tutus on our pigs.
Yeah.
Hog dressing means we're killing them and we're butchering them and we're preserving them and we're eating them.
Yep.
So take the lipstick off the hog and dress it.
We may have to put some lipstick on this hog before it's over.
Yeah. Mountain crafts and foods, planting by the signs, snake lore, hunting tales, faith healing, moonshining, and other affairs of plain living. There's just, again, it's just resources that are so valuable. What was that in there? Is that a picture in there or something?
Yeah. Yep. Looks like it's a Father's Day card.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't a naked picture of anybody.
Thank God. That's what I was afraid of.
I'm going to try to find. You keep going on this. I'm going to try to find a picture. I'm going to tell you, and people will understand where my madness started.
Okay. So, yeah, these are the two resources. I mean, I have a library full of this kind of stuff, but these are the two big ones, in my opinion, that you could, if you had these and had a few hand tools, you could start on your path to being self-sufficient. So this is the knowledge you need is here. You'd have to have the energy and the know-how to get out there and start doing it. But people overcomplicate things. They really do. I feel like that simplicity is the key when you're constructing like here on my place. I have one thing on my list that construction will start this year. That I don't have is a root cellar, but I will have a root cellar. But you need a place to preserve food, a way to preserve food that doesn't require refrigeration, and that would be a smokehouse. You can cold smoke meats to be preserved long term, and a root cellar gives you the ability to store a lot of produce. A lot of root crops will last well through the winter and into the next growing season in a root cellar.
Have you ever dug the hole in the ground and then lined it with leaves or straw? Have you ever used that method for cabbages and stuff? I
have not, but that was my dad. My dad he talked about that. He said they would dig a hole and 4 or 5 feet deep and put straw in the bottom of it,
right,
and put a stack of apples in there.
Yep.
And then another layer of straw and another stack of apples. And in the winter, they would just they'd have a piece of plywood or a piece of old tin over the top of it with a rock on it. And because you want to keep it somewhat dry. You want something to shed the water shed off of the top of it.
Yeah.
And that was their little mini root cellar. And it kept that kind of stuff all winter long, no problem.
You remember back in the day, you'd pull into a lot of these old homesteads around here. When you drove through the county, it looked like a roof in the yard. There was only about a foot up off the ground. And that was a root cellar. People would go in, there would be a stairway off of one end, and you'd go down in that hole.
Yeah.
That was about 6 feet deep, and that was their root cellar.
Yeah, all the old houses, any house that was built, especially out in the country, in the rural areas, that was built before refrigeration, always had a root cellar.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I mean, and that's another thing that we tend to overcomplicate. I've seen some really elaborate ones, but almost everybody has a root cellar already.
Mm-hmm.
It's in their crawl space.
Yeah.
I mean, your crawl space stays at constant temperature, around 50 some degrees, and the humidity is usually about right.
Mm-hmm.
And you could literally, if you had no other choice, you could cut a hole in your floor and use an old milk crate and lower it down into your crawl space and put the lid back down.
Yeah.
Put your, I mean, we could do all of these things to have the ability to preserve some food pretty simply.
I told you I was going to look this up, and I knew where it was at. There's another picture. I think it's in Foxfire 2 or 3. This is 1. But look at that picture right there.
Yep.
So there's a guy there by the name of Ray Connor, or what's that name on there?
Yeah, Ray Connor. Yep.
Yep.
You want me to read this little?
Yeah.
It says, Ray Connor, an avid hunter, stands with one of the plots he uses for bear hunting. In the background are skins from a few of his kills.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that was my fetish and my walk down my memory lane. I read this book when I was probably, 10. This is one of the books that I started reading. Why I would read something like this when I'm 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But so Josh Michaelis, this is why I have plots, because I read a Foxfire book and Ray Connor had one pictured in there.
That's awesome.
And then when you look on back through here, like there's pictures of trapping, box traps.
Yep.
I built one of those traps.
Yep. I built one too when I was a kid, similar to that. Yep.
Yep. And then you get over here, and I forget who this is. This may be, I don't remember, but they're talking about
Jake Waldrop.
Yep. Crow calls and calls. I would sit around and make stuff. I made that call right there that this guy's blowing on in that picture.
Right.
I think that's a crow call. It was made out of a shirt stay and a split stick. And the collar stays and the old shirts, it was a thin piece of plastic that was in there, and I cut open a shirt that I shouldn't have been cutting open, and made the reed for that thing, and you blow it, and
that's awesome. And all of that is right here.
It's right there.
Book.
Yeah.
This is old wisdom and knowledge that is there. You can't put a price on this.
Right.
You can't.
Right.
The only thing more valuable than this is being able to sit down next to one of these old timers.
Yeah.
And have them actually show you hands-on how to do it.
Yeah.
That's the only thing more valuable than these books, these resources.
Yep. But it's one of those things, John, that we got to figure out. I'm telling you, when you know how to do stuff like this and you're not dependent on, and you're not afraid to work.
Right. It is work. Definitely is work.
It gives you a sense of independence.
Mm-hmm.
I love the first harvest of the year. We were talking about the green beans and potatoes with a chunk of pork in it,
Yeah.
I always take a picture of that, and it's like everything on this plate was homegrown.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
There it is.
No comparison.
There isn't.
No.
Sense of accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about, I was out hoeing the garden and working in the garden the other day, and I was thinking about different articles to write, and just because that gives you an opportunity to start thinking about that and some of the parallels of every other parts of your life. When you're sitting there and you're getting the weeds out of your garden.
Yeah.
And you start thinking about, are there weeds in my life? What do I need to weed out of my life that I don't need?
Yeah.
Just crazy stuff like that. My brain goes in those directions when I start looking at that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it and think, when I was a kid, it was like, yeah, this sucks. I hate it. I was just like, holy crap, look at all these green beans that we got to weed. And it was like a death sentence, and I hated it. It was hot. All my buddies were going to Saraland and playing in the pool, and we were, hoeing green beans. And I had a lot of ill feelings towards my dad about it.
Yeah.
But at this stage of my life, and knowing that if everything away from me, if it all shut down, we can make it.
That's right. That's right. And I've thought about, I touched on it a little bit earlier, I think, but my son and I were talking about how long could we survive right now if we didn't eat anything outside of what we've raised here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a year. I think we could survive a year with, I mean, I'm talking about all livestock being butchered eventually. But see, that's the other thing. And he had he was like, well, but he said, you're talking about like off grid, like power grid goes down. And that's a reality when the power companies are sending those emails out to people right now that there could be rolling blackouts because of this extreme heat.
Yeah.
So it is, I mean, this isn't some kind of conspiracy thing. This is reality. And he said, well, how would you're going to butcher animals? I said, well, you just butcher them as you need them. And I said, my grandma Bolin used to, if they were going to have Sunday chicken, she'd kill chicken Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
It's meat on the hoof. it's right there.
Hey,
you process it when you need it. And then if you can preserve it by smoking it or salt curing or whatever, then you preserve what you can eat. And, and I guess you could even have a 3-legged hog, if you just want to take one leg.
I'll tell you what,
I better back up on that. Animal rights people just, that's horrible.
Oh yeah.
Like they'll have pictures of 3-legged hogs out there with my picture and
yeah. No, when my grandparents were growing up, they said there wasn't any such thing as a roadkill chicken. Said that was just supper.
Yeah.
If somebody hit a chicken on the road out in front of the house, man, you got out there and you got that thing, you got it cleaned, and that was going in the pot because it was going to be eaten.
Right.
That's the way people lived.
Yeah.
And
I had a couple years ago, I walked into my garage and just stepped into the door there, the walk door, and looked down. There's a rabbit there, dead rabbit, and a good-sized rabbit,
mm-hmm.
and it had the whole back end of it, like its hip and thigh area, was chewed up. And we have a cat out here that was capable of doing that.
Yeah.
Just an old barn cat. And I just assumed that cat had somehow cornered that rabbit, or maybe the rabbit got hit and hurt or whatever. I don't know what happened, but I knew the rabbit was laying there in front of me and was very fresh. And I skinned it.
Yeah.
And I cooked it over an open fire and ate it.
I
mean, it's I read a book years ago called The Last American Man about Eustace Conway. Eustace Conway is one of the characters in Mountain Man, the series on history or discovery, whatever it is. And I was enamored by Eustace Conway. I mean, he was just a free-living, self-sufficient guy, and this was before he gained any notoriety from the Mountain Man series. And he talked about living off a roadkill. He was a very highly educated man. He went to college and had a master's or PhD, and decided he wasn't going to live in a cubicle and wasn't going to fight the traffic, and decided he would rather be self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
And he lived in a teepee for a few years,
right,
and saved money. Did a little piddly stuff on the side here and there and saved money and ended up buying land. Anyway, he talked about harvesting roadkill. And he said the main thing is if there's fleas on it, it's still fresh, because fleas will leave. When that meat turns, the fleas won't be there anymore. So he said if you find roadkill and there's still fleas, and of course in the winter, if it's cold out, you're pretty much good to go. But, I mean, you got to know what you're doing, as you know, especially as you know, and your listeners know a hell of a lot more about this than I do. There's things to look for in diseased animals and things,
mm-hmm.
and fortunately, there's hunters that will harvest those diseased animals. But I have no problem at all with that scenario.
Yeah.
And the sheriff's department, where I started my career years ago, we had a roadkill call list.
That's right.
And a deer would get hit, and there was a long list of people in the county that would come right out and get that deer.
When I retired 3 years ago, it'll be 4 years this year, there wasn't a list anymore.
Yeah, they've stopped it here too.
The people, they just couldn't find people to come and get it. So now the county highway's going out and picking up roadkill.
Too much work.
Yeah.
And
I think it's just a lack of awareness too, though.
And it's the loss of that knowledge.
And it's the feeling. It's the feeling of it's roadkill. You know.
Yeah. Big deal. I mean, that deer could be massacred from the midsection to the head, and there's still there's good hindquarters there. There's plenty of. I mean, I'm getting hungry talking about it.
Me too. I brought home some muskrats one time that we did on a nuisance trapping project. Mm-hmm. The biologists were actually helping and they were just nuisance trapped, and I brought them home and cleaned them, and the kids didn't even know, and the wife didn't even know what they were eating. Mm-hmm. It's almost dark as chocolate, as tender as it could be, and they're sitting there and they're just eating it, and they're like, "What kind of meat is this?" And I said, "What do you think it is?" And Jake would be like, "This tastes like squirrel," you know, and he's just a little bitty guy. Uh-huh. And the daughter, 2 girls are there eating it, and they're chowing down on it, just loving it. It's coming right off the bone. And my wife finally looks at it, and she goes, "No, seriously, what is this?" And I said, it's muskrat. And they all stopped and looked at me, and all the kids were like, "Well, it's good." You know, just grease from ear to ear, buddy.
Yep. Just a short pause and right back to eating.
Yep.
That's the thing. I mean, there's and talking about what I'm doing here, growing everything edible that I possibly can, including livestock and egg producing chickens and ducks, and all of that being gone. Then I'll just go back down in the hills and hollers and start hunting and trapping. Mm-hmm. I mean, we need to know these skills. Every generation, our kids and our grandkids need to know how to do these things, because it removes a lot of fear and uncertainty. Everybody talking about beating a drum about, truck drivers are going to stop. Thank God for our truck drivers stocking the shelves for us. But everybody trying to throw that panic and fear into everybody. And this may sound arrogant. I don't mean it to sound arrogant. I don't mean to sound like I'm a badass, because, there's plenty of guys out there who take me out in a heartbeat with knowledge and skills. But I just say, let's do it. Let's just get it over with. Let's quit beating the drum of fear, and let's just shut the power grid down. Let's just shut the grocery stores.
I'm not ready for that yet. I got to work a few more things out.
But I'm tired of, what I'm saying, though? It's like,
exactly
let's just get her done. Let's just do it, and we'll separate the men from the boys, and we'll come out tougher and stronger. So I guess my point in saying that is, do I really want that? No, that's bravado. I don't want that, because there would be a lot of people suffer if that happened.
Yeah.
A lot of elderly people, a lot of sick people, a lot of people in cities that don't have the resources, and I'm not a cold-hearted bastard. I don't want that to happen either.
Right. But
my point is, learning these skills will remove that fear. Mm-hmm. It's just like our background in law enforcement, and we've talked about this before. Pretty much in depth, you and I have, because we've had some of the same experiences in law enforcement. The trained law enforcement officers, the well-trained law enforcement officers, sometimes come across as pricks. People think that they're arrogant, and but they're not. They're prepared and trained, and they're vigilant, and they're not afraid. They're not afraid of approaching a situation, because they've trained themselves. They've had good mentors and good trainers that have put them at a place where they're ready.
Yeah, I'll comment on that real quick. Try not to get sidetracked, but the guy that you like, the guy that's friendly, the guy that's just everybody. Most of the time, my experience in 28 years of law enforcement, they're not the guy that you want to show up when somebody's trying to hurt your family. That's steal your stuff. I've watched video after video of those people, those types of officers that now there's some of them, I'm telling you, and they're better than I am, because they could do both things.
Yeah,
It's like the old General Mattis.
Yeah.
Be kind, be courteous, but have a plan to kill everybody you meet.
Yeah.
You know, and I knew guys that were just exactly like that. But yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. So my point in saying that, knowing that you would relate very well to that statement, prepare. Let's prepare ourselves. And you know, it's sad. It's sad because we can talk about this preparation, and we could set up classes and workshops and camps, and we would be labeled domestic terrorist,
A militia.
when it's the farthest thing from the truth. We're just nostalgic, old-fashioned, self-sufficient people.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we mean any harm to anyone. And it's sad because it's ignorance on the side that looks at us that way. It's just ignorance. They don't know. They haven't been exposed to this lifestyle. They think that now, not all of them. Some of them know damn well that we're
some of it's a real
harm,
government
but they
agenda.
want to label us. They want to label us and
Yeah.
take. You know, I'm always hesitant. I like to brag on social media just like anybody else does, but I'm hesitant to mention any kind of resources or stockpile of anything.
Right.
Because you know as well as I do, Chris, that's being monitored.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know where the little holdouts are going to be. They want to know where the self-sufficient neighborhoods and groups are going to be. They want to know
that ties right into another podcast we could do about, you know, how our egos and bragging on Facebook and different things can get us in trouble.
Yep.
Even with hounds. But and that's right up your alley with your former work with the ASPCA. But yeah, I think we need to do more of these, John. Get together more often. But let's go out and take a look at the garden, and we'll record a segment out there, and then we'll come back in here and wrap it up.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right. Yeah, John, we're just walking around out here in the garden and looking around at everything you got going on. You got a lot going on out here, so we're just going to kind of walk around and talk about it. But let's start with that corn patch back there. What you got going on there?
All right. This patch of corn here it's not a huge patch, but I always like to do at least one little area of what's referred to as the Three Sisters method of planting. And it's an old Native American way of planting beans, corn, and some type of fall or winter squash all in the same area. And they all benefit from one another. The beans, the pole beans.
And when we're talking an area here, I mean, you said small, and this is small. Yeah. This is what, probably 15 feet long by 8 feet wide or so?
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
And you got a lot of food growing in this small area here.
Yeah, there's a lot here. When it comes time to harvest this, it'll be a lot more than what you would think that would come out of here.
So yeah, lay out the system. Just kind of draw a picture of what we're looking at.
Okay. Here. So the corn is an Indian corn variety, a dry corn that can be later be ground and milled to be eaten or whatever. A lot of people just use it to decorate, in the fall, but that's fine. But it can be used after that for a purpose, and it can be fed to animals as well. I mean, it's a very versatile corn, dry type of corn. And I plant it first, and it gets up to about 6 or 8 inches, and then I'll go in between the rows and plant a pole bean variety. And a couple of weeks after that, 2-3 weeks after that, sometimes I'll plant my fall or winter squash. I've got a winter squash. I can't remember exactly what the variety is I planted this year, but it's coming up good too, as you can see. But what happens is the beans are a nitrogen fixing. Legumes will put nitrogen in the ground, and the corn love the nitrogen, so they benefit from that. And the beans will climb the corn as it grows. This corn will get up to over 6 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
And The squash, the big broad leaves of the squash, it'll grow out amongst the rows of corn, and it shades the ground and blocks weeds and helps retain moisture. So it's a method of planting that's tried and true, and I like to incorporate it into my gardens at some point, somewhere, usually every year.
So on the squash, naturally, will it come in after the harvest of the beans and the corn? Is that the idea?
Yep. It'll be the last thing that'll be harvested, and the vines will start to dry and the leaves will start to dry after everything else is done, and then you just go out and pick the squash, the winter squash, or the pumpkins. You could do it with pumpkins, any of the squash family, and that stuff will store great in a root cellar. It'll store all winter and late into the next season if it's the right conditions.
Okay, so let's talk about the order of planting and then the order of harvest. So what order do you plant in?
The corn first.
Okay.
And then you come in and you put the beans in between the rows of corn, and then the squash.
Okay, and then your order of harvest?
About the same. Now the beans, actually the beans will be first.
Okay.
The beans will be first. They'll start to be harvested quite a bit sooner actually than the corn because the corn can just be left. It's not like sweet corn where you got to watch it and go get it. You can let this corn stay on the stalk like field corn.
Yeah.
Until the stalk dries.
So you can pick this corn in November as long as you can keep the varmints out of it.
Yep, that's the key.
And you've also got some natural weed control going on here with all your shaded ground.
Yeah, it does. It doesn't shade everything out, but it sure helps, and it helps retain that moisture.
That's a big thing. The current gardening techniques, a lot of times we end up with spending money on gas and rototillers and different things to get weeds out when there are better ways like this.
Yeah.
We can maintain ground moisture. We can do weed control, and we can multi plant or multi-purpose a small space and produce a lot of food.
That's right. And it's something that it was hard for me to get away from the traditional way of gardening, because when I was a kid, my dad was
That's all we did.
Yeah. I mean, my dad always called it a truck patch.
Right.
They would plant, go in and disc and plow and disc, and it would be just powder dirt, and they'd go back in and then plant. He would put up a string line and make straight as an arrow rows and plant everything, and it was beautiful.
I'm guilty of that.
I know. I was too for years. It was hard to get away from that. But I'll tell you what really forced me to get away from it was I don't have space.
Yeah.
I have 1 acre here, central Indiana, that's hills and hollers, and I've had to terrace, I've had to do raised beds, I've had to do everything to make enough space to grow what I want and what I need. We do have a little co-op here going on between 3 neighbors, us and 2 other neighbors, and there's more ground across the road that we've started to utilize, but I like this method of planting, and I like this. I've gotten to where I'm doing a lot of rotational and seasonal planting too. I used to panic if I didn't get everything in the ground by mid-May, 1st of June. I thought, well, it's too late now. I can't do anything, and that's not true. There's just so much you can plant a lot earlier than what people think. All my brassicas, my cabbage, my broccolis, kale, all that kind of stuff, I plant it as soon as I can in the spring. And I put it, and when I say as soon as I can, I've planted some of that stuff in March, 1st of April.
Yeah.
And I know we're still going to get snow, we're still going to get frost, but I'll cover it loosely with something. And the best broccoli and cabbages and stuff like that I've ever had been hit just a little bit with frost. And it did something to them. I'm not an expert in this, but I know from what I see, you don't have to be an expert when the proof is in the pudding, as they say. That little bit of frostbite really makes that stuff take off and grow.
It make the sugar come up in it, or what do you think it does?
It does that, I guess. It does that also, because your lettuces and stuff like that, when there's some cold nights, it has a real good crisp and sweet flavor to it. Versus like now, we're having record high heats this week, and a lot of my lettuces and stuff have bolted. I mean, shot straight up, and they're not going to be edible
Right.
for us.
Right.
They'll go to the animals or they'll be composted. So nothing gets wasted here. Nothing.
All right, let me draw a picture here for what we're looking at, because we're trying to describe what we got going on here. But from, you said 1 acre, and you're utilizing a lot of it.
Pretty much every
bit of it. So within 100 feet of us, just in this patch that you talked about, your Three Sisters method, you've got your squash, your beans, your corn. We talked about that. You've got your hand on a trellis right now that's got Concord grapes on it. Mm-hmm. We got tomato plants growing right here along the edge of this Three Sisters method corn patch.
Mm-hmm. There's some peppers in there too.
Oh yeah, we got peppers. What kind of peppers we got?
Those are bell and banana peppers.
Bell and banana peppers.
Yep.
You've heard the turkey gobbling over here, so there's meat. Mm-hmm. And then what we got growing on this trellis back here towards the turkey pen?
That's more of the pole beans, the same variety. They're Blue Lake, Kentucky Wonder pole beans, and they're the same variety I've got growing out here with the corn. And it's nice to put them over, just bend on an old hog panel into a U shape and drive some T-posts in the ground and plant your beans. And when they get up and all the way over and you start to harvest, you can literally stand under the cattle panel and pick beans.
Sounds like a good plan. It's better than bending over picking beans.
When you start to get our age, my age, I'm sorry, Chris.
Hey, stop gobbling. Even the turkey was laughing. He's still laughing.
Yeah, he thinks he likes to make fun of us.
We got the chicken pen right here. I mean, this is within 6 feet of these tomato plants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so there's your eggs.
The reason that I've designed it this way also is I have all these. You'll see more gates and doors on this acre than you'll see on a big ranch. I've got all of these little paddocks and little things divided in it. It all serves a purpose. In the fall, I open these gates at different intervals, and I'll let the chickens out into this garden, and they'll clean it up. They'll eat every little bit of scrap that's left in it, and they'll fertilize it for me. And at times, I've even let a hog in. Now, they don't need much time. One hog will till this up and fertilize it real quick. If you don't get him out of here, he'll wreck it. But the chickens do a great job. Scratching up, they'll eat the bugs, they'll eat the slugs, everything that's left in it, and clean it up and convert it into eggs.
Yep. And right beside the chicken patch to the left, or the chicken house to the left, I can see some remnants of onion in there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you've already done an onion harvest here.
Yep. This has been harvested once already this year. This patch right here.
You've got your kale growing. Mm-hmm. And what are you going to do with this kale?
I'm going to sell it to hippies for a real high price.
You had a plan for it.
We love kale. That we can't let different groups of people steal our food. Make us feel like we can't eat it anymore.
That's right.
Kale's still good.
That's right.
And I love hippies too. Don't get me wrong. I love them. Hippies, punk rockers.
Hey, if it wasn't for hippies, we'd have probably lost a lot of this technology. Honestly.
Yeah, honestly, it is. It is true. I mean, But anyway, we don't want to get sidetracked. Yeah, this kale, I'm just going to let it go, and it'll get big and bushy and go to seed most likely, and it'll overwinter really well. I'll throw some straw over it this fall, and then next winter it'll come up bigger, or next spring it'll come up bigger and stronger, and I'll prune it down, and it'll shoot up new leaves that'll be better than these. There's a lot of things you can overwinter. You can just put it, as I like to say, put it to bed for the winter. Throw some straw over it.
And your chickens coming out here aren't going to affect that?
They won't hurt it. They won't hurt it that much because even if they did prune it down, the root, and now, if you left them out here too long, they'd scratch it up.
Right.
They'd get to the root and get it scratched up. But I don't leave them out here that long at a time. I leave them out here just long enough to clean things up.
Let's move down here before we dive heat exhaustion and dehydration.
It's hot.
All right, what we got going on here to the right?
This is my first planting of potatoes. These are the red variety. I don't remember the exact name, but the little red potatoes, what my folks and my grandparents always called early potatoes. They're the ones that you harvest with the green beans, make you a big pot, throw a piece of pork in there. And I use what's called the Ruth Stout method on my potatoes. I used to do the till and hill and plant the potatoes and go to all that work, and I was introduced to this method by Wolf Beach Farms out in Greencastle, and you just throw your potatoes down on some good ground, and some good, ground that's somewhat loose. You don't want to throw them right down on hard clay or anything, but
Right.
Throw the potatoes down and then cover them with some old hay. Pull the old hay out of your animal enclosures, or just get a bale of hay and throw the hay on top and water it real good, and those potatoes will grow underneath that hay, and they don't have to fight that soil, push that soil out of the way. The potatoes get big, and
what's it like to harvest them?
They just pull right up.
Yeah,
you grab the potato and pull on it, and it comes right up. There's not a lot of digging. I've got a potato fork around here somewhere, but it's kind of retired.
How many variety of potatoes are you growing on your 1 acre here?
I've got these red. I've got the big white varieties, the big like baking potato varieties, and I've got some of the deep purple. They're like, you see them all in the store, what they call fingerling potatoes. You harvest those when they're pretty small too. Mm-hmm. Real dark purple. They're full of a lot of good vitamins and antioxidants and stuff. The darker, the purples and the reds are really just full of.
We literally have not taken 10 steps from when we started recording this, and we've already talked about several varieties, and now we're going back outside here, and you've got your blackberries growing right out here against the fence for this little enclosure. I'm going to take a picture of all this. But.
Okay. Yeah, these are thornless blackberries, and I got these starts from a friend of mine probably 5-6 years ago, and they're doing great. This year is a really good year so far for berries and fruit. Mm-hmm. I've seen bumper crops everywhere. Their things are doing really well, and the birds know it too, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, these are thornless blackberries. They're loaded. There's more on here than I've seen. And then on the other side of the gate, I've got the red raspberries. I got these starts from my mom probably 20 years ago now. Yeah. And they go crazy. I mean, these things, if I let them, I see a red one back there, a ripe one, hanging on top back there.
Don't eat it. You won't get any more.
I know. If I let these go, they'd just spread all over this whole garden. They just really do well. If a guy wanted to just grow a big patch of red raspberries, get a start of this, whatever this variety is. It's an old variety.
Yeah.
And they do great. This grapevine that we just walked under is, like you mentioned earlier, it's the old Concord grapes. They're full of seeds and stuff, but they're just that good, deep, dark purple grape variety that's good for making jellies and preserves. And this is only its second year, I think. If I recall, it's its second year, and it looks like it's going to produce.
Yeah, for sure. And then you got some more peppers over here, it looks like?
Yeah.
In a raised bed right here?
Yeah, I had this raised bed. I built this crate to transport feeder pigs, and we ended up hauling them a different way, and I thought, I'm going to use that crate for something. I brought it back here and filled it with horse manure and dirt, and I've already harvested some greens out of here, kale and mustard greens out of here, and I just replanted these peppers in here. These are cayenne peppers.
Yeah.
We'll see how they do in the raised bed, but raised beds are great for hilly ground and for, just to get things up off the ground, away from pests and, rabbits and stuff like that. But they're a little more work to keep watered. I mean, they don't get the moisture that the plants get from being right in the ground, but they're worth it. I like them.
Yeah.
I'll show you several more here in a little bit, but I've got sunflowers planted
all the way around. I was getting ready to say,
this.
right up against this raised bed, we got a plant. What's this plant in the front?
That's lavender.
Got lavender in the front.
Yep. My wife makes soaps and she makes essential oils and stuff, and she uses the lavenders for that. And we use the lavender in the sauna in the winter. Yeah.
And then what's the greens here?
That's some random greens that the seeds fell out when we sowed them in this raised bed, and they're still growing there, and that you can see the bugs are getting to them quite a bit. But I'll let these grow on up and pull them and feed them to the hogs or the chickens.
Yeah.
Nothing gets wasted.
Everything's got a purpose.
Yep.
Got an onion going to seed here. You got strawberry patch here that's just within 20 feet of your cabbage and everything right here.
Yep, we've got this little strawberry patch that I've got June-bearing varieties and ever-bearing varieties. And These came from Wolf Beach Farms. And this vine is a volunteer, but it's a wild grape. This is a wild grapevine. Like when you're in the woods, you see those little tiny grapes hang. They're just packed full of flavor. So I'm going to let this thing go. I'm going to let it grow up around this fence and see what it does.
They've got a mind of their own. I'm constantly fighting them and stuff down there at home. Yeah. Well, hey, I think that gives us a pretty good idea what we're dealing with. We got the smokehouse right here. We got a picture of it last time I was here. You just put in a sauna and you're working on your greenhouse.
Yep. And we do. You sure you don't want to go look at this little spot real quick?
Yeah, we better.
All right. We'll go through this gate. I've got this, what is this, about a 24 by 4 or 5 feet patch of nothing but mammoth sunflowers.
Yep.
These things will get massive, and the sunflower seeds, if you don't have a place for nut trees or you're impatient, the sunflower seed is the next best thing. I mean, that everybody knows the nutty flavor, but you get a real quick harvest.
Yeah.
And you take that big head, that big sunflower head, and you can dry it, hang it somewhere dry and kind of dark, and let it dry. And you can harvest those seeds and put them in a dry brown paper bag and put them in a closet somewhere and let them continue to dry all season. You can roast them in the oven. I mean, they're just full of calories and good stuff. And whatever you don't use, feed to your animals.
Yeah, you can put a whole head in that chicken coop right there and they'll clean it up.
Yep, they love them. And this, the stalk, everything about this is edible for these animals. In fact, you can see where we've had to barricade that fence. We had a calf in here. She's moved over with the other cows now, but she figured out she was big enough she could push that wire right in. She ate a whole row of those sunflowers before.
Hey, there's your potato fork. The handles broke out of it.
There's the old retired potato fork. And then along this orchard fence, this little orchard we have 2 pink lady apples and then a peach tree in between. They're all starting to produce pretty well. This is about the 5th or 6th year for these apple trees, and I've pruned them way down every spring. The peach tree's doing okay. We did have an issue. The goats got in here and almost killed that peach tree, but it came back. You can see the big wound there.
Yeah. And the chickens and the turkeys and everything are grazing. They're free ranging right under the trees here.
Yeah,
So
we've let them back out. Normally, well, this was just a couple weeks ago. This orchard looked like that area over there. It was just full of that green grass.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was full.
Yeah.
And when this heat wave hit, we let the chickens start coming back out here because they can get in the shade. It's a lot cooler at the front than it is the back of this chicken coop. So they've been out here, and it didn't take them long to eat that grass, pick it down.
Yeah.
But they won't hurt any of that. They don't hurt the orchard at all.
Well, we got growing against
this is peas, snap peas, or sugar snap peas. Starting to get a little wilt on top that I need to address there. But I planted them all along the orchard fence, and they're a nitrogen fixing. They're a legume, so they're going to put nitrogen in the ground here. It's going to be beneficial for everything. And then I took a lot of this old hay with manure in it, where we had a round bale out here all winter, and I've spread it in front on top of cardboard. I put cardboard down to block the weeds, and then put the hay on top of that, and it'll break down really well. The cardboard will be gone in a month.
Right.
It'll compost into the ground, but by then the weeds that were under it will be dead.
Yeah.
So it's just creating new garden space by doing that.
Do you own a rototiller?
I do.
Do you use it?
Very, very seldom anymore.
Yeah.
Very seldom. I'll use it to, if I'm going to break a brand new bed, sometimes I'll use it to get rid of the turf and stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't till much anymore.
All right, man. I think that's not all that's here. I mean, we got sheep right across the fence here. What you got in the back pen back there?
Peacocks.
Got you. Oh, what do you do with the peacocks?
They're my wife's kind of hobby. She likes them. Really, if you were going to raise them though, we have 2 peahens and 1 peacock in there right now, and they're 2 years old. Those things are crazy expensive. If you could sell a pea chick, especially a pea hen. I mean, you can almost name your price.
Really?
A couple, $200, $300, $400.
That's more lucrative than selling coonhound puppies.
Yeah. So we could start a peacock farm here, but she loves to mess with them, and I'm planning on making their enclosure is going to be expanded quite a bit. I'm going to go up. I'm going to have my son-in-law's a lineman, so he has all the stuff, the tools and everything. We're going to put cable up in the trees down to the ground, and we're going to make a big enclosure where they can fly up onto the tree limbs.
Really?
Yeah, because peacocks, they need a lot of space
Uh-huh.
to really get up and fly and stretch their wings. And
Yep.
So that's on my list of things to do here.
Let's go in the house and
Let's cool off.
rehydrate. And I should have brought another T-shirt maybe. It's hot. It's supposed to be 97 here today. It's getting there quick.
Yep, it is.
All right, so we're back in the house and took a look at the garden there and got the layout there. Let's kind of wrap this whole thing up. John, what you're doing out there, I mean, you're using every available space. We saw the gardening methods you're using, and you're producing a lot of food out there in a very small space. And I'm going to say, you said it earlier, you said you think you could last a year, but by the time you harvest seeds and you replant and you use those sheep to have lambs in the spring, you got a billy goat and a you know, and nanny goats out there, you can make more lambs or make more baby goats.
Right.
You
Yeah.
got chickens.
If you look at it that way, right.
Yeah. I mean, this is a rolling, sustaining operation you got going.
Right. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it is too. I do. I'm always careful to not get comfortable and say, okay, we've arrived. We're good. We're good to go.
That's right.
It's a constant.
We talk about
evolution.
that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Never be that person that refuses to learn.
Right. There's so much to learn. I mean, just like we talked about out at the garden, how hard it was for me to get away from that traditional rototilling.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to think, well, how in the world am I going to grow a garden if I can't rototill?
Right.
What am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to keep the weeds at bay? How am I going to? I got to plant this stuff in a straight row so I can get the tiller down between the rows.
That's right.
And it's not true at all. I mean, if that works for you, fine. Again, like I said, I'm not beating a drum.
I do it because
one way or another.
The reason why I still do it is because I'm a Marine and we like straight lines and stuff.
You do.
You know,
yeah, you do. You got
stuff that's not straight just drives me crazy.
Yeah, it's going to drive you crazy. Yeah. And if I had, like, we didn't go across the street. We'll do that another time, I guess. But there's a patch of corn over there that my son-in-law is putting in, and he's doing it. He's staggering it. A week or two between blocks.
Right.
And it's the old way. He tilled it up and planted it, and he's using some some preen and stuff to.
It's the intermediate way.
Yeah.
What you're doing is the old way.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing intermediate. You went back to the old.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He likes the newer ways of doing things, and that's fine because it all comes together and it's beneficial to the family and to those that are involved in this little co-op. Either way, I'm not going to tell him don't do it that way, and he's not going to tell me don't do it your way. We just do it, and it works.
I'm sure he likes the strawberries. I'm sure he likes the herbs. I bet he likes the sauna. Has he ever been over and come over and sat in the sauna?
I think he did. I think he did with my daughter maybe for a short period this past winter.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it was everybody that it's kind of funny because people are hesitant to get in there. I got into that because I went to South Dakota a couple years ago and was so fortunate to have. I've got some friends out there, and one of them is a Lakota medicine man, and I mean this just a.
Did you go through a sweat?
I went. He invited me into a sweat lodge ceremony.
Did they make smoked peyote and take like mushroom enemas and stuff like that?
Thank God. none of that. There was none of that. Hey, being an old cop, I was like, okay, what's really going to happen here? I'm not into this mind altering. But you know what? None of it was necessary. There was no substance used except for the extreme heat and the ceremony, and it was mind altering. It was mind altering all by itself. It was a spiritual. I'm not a religious guy. We could do a whole podcast on how organized religion is detrimental.
Go ahead. Let's go into the sweat.
Let's keep talking.
Let's keep talking sweat.
But man, I'm telling you, it was something. It was intense. It was intense. I mean, it was hot. It was an actual Native American sweat lodge that he constructed, and to hear him sing those songs in that Native American language, and beat on that drum, and that whole thing was healing for me, physically and spiritual healing, and I had made up my mind right then that I'm going to have access to something like that. Now, there was no way I could copy that tradition and the ceremony, but I knew that the sweating in that extreme heat, in that steam sauna environment, was good for me. And so I made a hybrid of a Finnish sauna and a Native American sweat lodge, and used an old wood stove and stacked stone all around it, both sides and on top of it, and used my Angus cow hides to help insulate the inside of the wall and have something to sit on soft. And
so you didn't get splinters in your I got
you. You can go in there pretty nature like if you want to. And I insulated the thing. I showed you that I insulated it with the wool that we sheared off the sheep. And it's awesome. In the winter, you get in the middle of the winter, after the holidays pass, January, February, and those gray, cold days just drag. You fire that sauna up, get up to about 150 degrees, and climb in there and start pouring water on those hot rocks. Oh, man. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy, just a hillbilly sauna. You just need some firewood and some water to throw on the rocks. And but yeah.
So you recommend any other good books? We need to wrap this up. You and I can go for days.
I know, and we're gonna get somebody on social media saying, "Man, I tried to listen to that, but those guys just went on and on. That guy just goes on and on." I love to read the comment. That's all right.
All right. So we got the Encyclopedia for Country Living by Carla Emery.
Yep.
This book, you can tell you've used it a lot.
Yep.
Is this the only copy you got, or have you got another worn-down copy?
Nope, that's the only copy I have right now. I had an older copy. I think I gave it to somebody, loaned it to somebody.
The Foxfire books.
The Foxfire books.
Any other?
That's all right now.
The starter kit.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend without overwhelming people with a whole bunch of different books. But as you could see, like even right over there, there's some books, just different books that I've picked up.
Yeah, we're not even going to release those titles right now just because we've got a homework assignment with the Encyclopedia of Country Living. But
spend time with your elders. Find those old folks that nobody ever talks to because they think they're just old has-beens.
The mentors. Find a mentor.
It's a shame that people don't have that kind of respect for their elders anymore. I shouldn't say that. I don't know what I'm being presumptuous, but it's
find somebody that knows the old ways.
Yeah, find those old guys. Like you guys, you houndsmen, you've got those old elders in your group that
Roy Clark down there grows.
Sit around and listen to them for hours and hours and hours, and they're going to give you information it's priceless.
Right.
Priceless.
Right. Yeah, I guess people say, well, these guys are just alarmists, or they're just trying to, buying into the scare tactic type stuff. It's not that for me at all. It's just
same here.
I like being prepared, and I like having the knowledge to be prepared, and it's just one of those deals that I enjoy it. It's growing a garden, growing your own food. I did all the canning last year, most of it. My wife helped me do some of it, but it's just therapeutic. And when you walk in and you look at the shelves of food that are sitting there, then there's a sense of accomplishment and, like you said, security.
Yeah.
Freedom and security.
Yep.
That you did it.
Yeah. Yeah. It removes the unknowns and the fear.
Yeah.
You know, just like
the only thing that
first time you jumped off the diving board, first time you took off on a bicycle by yourself. I mean,
yeah.
It's all about jumping in and just doing it.
Next time we get together, we'll kind of take a deep dive. Maybe I could come back over and we could talk about food preservation.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Let's plan a fall visit.
Yeah, we're in the growing season right now. The harvest season is coming.
Yeah.
And we'll do some stuff on preservation of food because there's some smoking and salting and cold curing and all kinds of stuff that we can talk about.
We'll fire up the smokehouse.
There you go.
Yep.
All right. John, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. I hope somebody gets something out of it that they can use.
Oh, I'm sure they will. All right. Thanks a lot.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Houndsman XP podcast. I know that was not directly hound related, but it's been something that has been weighing on me pretty heavy. I look at social media, I see all the naysayers and the doomsday experts that are telling us where we're headed and what's going to happen. I'm not going to let it happen to me. We're here to find solutions, not talk about the problems. I hope this episode will cause you to take a personal inventory of where you're at and what you can regain control over in your life. When you live simple and you live free, you're not giving that control to anybody else. That is true freedom. The Houndsman did it before us, and we can do it again. Until next time, you follow your hounds, and I'll follow mine.